Hi, I'm Sue Thomas. I'm your Toastmaster tonight, and welcome to Toastmasters Live, where we do the speaking, the filming, and the editing. This time of year, storefronts and entrances are decorated with pumpkins, gourds, straw, or hay bales, I don't really know the difference, and corn stalks, all evidence of today's theme, fall harvest. This year, that phrase has taken on additional meaning for me. In April, most of us in this room, if not everyone in this room, attended a meeting where we heard about a new Toastmasters club, Toastmasters Live. The seed was planted. After meetings to discuss what we thought our garden should produce, we recorded our first broadcast in July. Just like any garden, some ideas flourished, while others took a bit more nurturing to help them along. With the support of North Metro TV, this fall we are seeing the fruits of our labor. We have episodes airing on public television that are also available for viewing online. So this year, I would like to officially recognize the successful fall harvest of Toastmasters Live. So let the meeting begin. We've got a number of speakers tonight, and we're going to be starting with George Deliduka. George is a former officer in the United States Air Force, and he's always been concerned about free speech privileges and rights. He has traveled the world observing the various ways people attempt to express themselves. Tonight, he is doing the first project in a communicating on video advanced speech manual titled Straight Talk. He is giving a timed editorial opinion on a subject near and dear to his heart. This editorial is to be 3 minutes long. His title is Don't Stifle Free Speech. Welcome, George Deliduka. Don't stifle free speech.
Freedom of speech is both a right and a privilege, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our viewing audience. There is a long history of individuals who have chosen to speak out in both word and action, and the presence of our flag has always been part of it. In the 1970s, during the Vietnam War, there were many protests, which included flag burning on occasion. In the 1980s, at the Olympics in South America, 4 black athletes bowed their heads, raised clenched fists as the flag was raised during their medal ceremony. They were protesting racism. In August of last year, professional football player Colin Kaepernick chose to express his free speech right to bring to the nation's general public of what he perceives is excessive police violence against blacks and minorities. He knelt down during the playing of the national anthem. Others are now beginning to follow his example. Our flag is a symbol of all we hold universally true. In all the above examples, the flag played an integral part in the protest. Decades ago, no one even considered those protest actions as disrespecting the flag. Along comes a multi-billionaire who objects to this latest free speech protest, and in my opinion, he's lashed out against Kaepernick, saying he is disrespecting the flag. Then he proceeds to tell the national leaders of the Football League to suspend or fire any football player who exercises their free speech right. These protests are focusing on violence waged against blacks and other minorities, not disrespect, and yes, the flag happens to be involved. So it is now time for we ordinary people to ingather, to unite, and to send a strong message to this man and to the world that these protesting people are not intentionally disrespecting the flag. In short, simple words, this man needs to butt out. Stop trying to control our free speech privileges and rights. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, George, for that incredibly inspiring speech, and also for reminding me to introduce the word of the day, which is ingather. George so appropriately used it during his speech. Ingather is A noun, a gathering in especially of farm products, harvest, a gathering together as of persons or assembly. So George used that word quite well in his opening speech. Our next speaker is Dan Nelson. He has 3 boys, William, age 20, Aviance, age 18, and Johnny, age 12. The oldest boys were adopted and came to his home when William was 5 and a half and Aviance was 4 years old. Their early years involved a lot of moving around from their biological mother to their aunt to other foster homes in between and after. It is still unknown today the extent and severity of abuse that occurred. They were certainly neglected, which is abuse. And Aviance has a scar on his hand that no one can explain. You hear the phrase, children are resilient, and that may be true, but effects of abuse can still last for years after it occurred. Today, Dan will discuss trauma in his speech entitled, The Body Keeps the Score. From the Competent Communicator Manual, please welcome Dan with his speech, The Body Keeps the Score. Thank you, Dan.
What do you think the odds are of being struck by lightning? I looked it up. It's actually about 1 in a million. And generally when people say the odds of something like that happening, they're talking about something that's very remote. It's something that does not happen very often. Not too many people get struck by lightning. Now, according to Dr. Bester van der Kolk, he wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he's a psychiatrist that deals with trauma patients. And he wrote about some statistics about what's going on today in the United States. He said that 1 in 5 have been molested, 1 in 4 have grown up in an alcoholic home, 1 in 3 experience physical violence in their household. And you can see, unfortunately, this is all too uncommon. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and the audience watching. Trauma is something that happens all over the place. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what trauma is, what causes trauma, what are some of the symptoms of trauma, how do people react to experiencing the trauma, and finally, just some areas of ways to be able to treat trauma. Now, first of all, let me define what trauma is. Trauma is, I define it as any damage to the psyche that transpires as a result of a severely difficult or painful event. Now, I take it this is pretty vague, but trauma can happen in a lot of different circumstances. I'm going to go over some of these to help you better understand what can cause trauma. One of the things is neglect. As the toaster mentioned in the introduction there, my 2 older sons were neglected. Their mother was busy doing her stuff in terms of drugs and prostitution, and leaving the kids to be fending on their own. Bullying is another area. You see kids that can be bullied in school or even on the internet, and that can have a traumatic effect on a kid. Also, domestic violence. It happens way too often in this country. And again, it's something that can cause some lasting damage. Also, sexual abuse. We see this in the news with Harvey Weinstein and all the women that are coming forward. I'm sure a lot of these women had no idea or tried to forget all these incidents that happened before, but all this has come to the forefront again. And again, they're reliving that trauma. Being a victim of an alcoholic parent. Having experienced a life-threatening disease. Surviving catastrophic events, such as war. Think of the soldiers that have been through combat, and when they come back, they're experiencing a post-traumatic stress syndrome. Also, weather. Think of the victims of the hurricanes in Texas and Florida and Puerto Rico. Again, these are traumatic events, and just because someone experiences the event doesn't necessarily mean they're going to experience the negative consequences of that, but you don't know who will or who won't. Mass violence. You just think of the situation in Las Vegas recently, and also the situation in Orlando, Florida, with the mass shootings. Again, those victims could be traumatized for many years down the road. So what are some of the symptoms of trauma? What does that look like? Well, shock, denial, and disbelief is a common one. They don't want to necessarily deal with the reality of what happened to them. They could be confused. They could have difficulty concentrating. There could be anger and irritability, mood swings, anxiety and fear. Now, I consider these to be the big ones, anxiety and fear, because I think underlying anyone that's experienced traumatic experience, there is a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear around that. And that's what really burdens them. And as the author of the book I mentioned, the symptoms manifest themselves in the body of this trauma. They also feel guilt, shame, and self-blame, especially when you're dealing with kids, because they have no way to deal with understanding what happened to them or why it happened to them. It could be withdrawal, feeling sad and hopeless, and feeling disconnected or numb. So those are some of the ways that symptoms you might see. So how do people cope? Well, a lot of times they just choose to ignore it or deny that it happened, or they just try to forget. But unfortunately, the body doesn't allow that. It shows up in ways that they have no control over. My son, Aviance, is a good example. There's a lot of things he's experienced that an example of someone that experienced trauma would experience. He's had experience of insomnia with his sleep. He's had panic disorders in terms of with people, in terms of anxiety in himself. He's had eating disorders in terms of an ulcer. And he's experienced with substance abuse and acting out. Sometimes, though, victims may not act out, but like my son did, but they may keep it in and hold it in. That's just as destructive. So those are some of the ways that manifestations of trauma has on people. I want to talk about treatments. Traditional therapy is called talk therapy, and that's fine. It's good for some types of issues. But unfortunately, though, the problem with talk therapy for trauma victims is they may not want to talk about it. This is the events that are very troubling to them, and they may not want to relive the experience by talking about it again. So also, another part of it is their memories. Their memories may not be complete. They may not remember everything, and they just may have fragments of memories of what occurred. So talk therapy is limited for trauma patients. The other treatment would be drug therapy. The problem with drug therapy, though, is that it's dealing with the symptoms. For example, depression, you're dealing with that symptom of that, but you're not dealing with the underlying cause. And ultimately, you want to be able to get off of the drugs at some time, but you can't if you're dealing with, in terms of a traumatic event, and you're taking drugs to help deal with those symptoms. Now, there are alternative treatments. Things like neurobiofeedback, there's play therapy for kids. And I just want to talk about one in particular. It's called EMDR. It stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Response. And basically, if you think about, in terms of the old movies where they're hypnotizing, they're watching something, in a similar way, the therapist is moving their finger back and forth and having the patient look at that. And they get to be a relaxed state. And in that state, they kind of process the events at that point. So it helps them, de-escalates the whole situation. It makes it much more, they feel calm when they're dealing with, in terms of thinking about the situation of the trauma. Now, how does it work? They don't really know yet. But it is recognized as a valid therapy. In fact, the VA hospital recommends it for patients who suffer from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, you may have experienced trauma yourself, or you may know others that have experienced trauma. And I urge you to encourage them to get some help. Now, you can't force people to get help. If they don't want to get help, you can't force them. But offer them alternatives. Say that there are other things you can do besides just doing talk therapy or relying on drugs. Now, to find therapists that actually treat this, I recommend you go to Google and you type EMDR therapist in Minnesota. The first link it gets to you will be one from Psychology Today that lists all the therapists in the state of Minnesota that offer this type of therapy, this EMDR. Now, this EMDR is meant to be treated for people that experience trauma. So these psychologists or psychiatrists know how to deal with trauma. So again, I'll leave you with this quote by an author, Dr. Loretta Scott. She said, "We can't help everyone, but everyone can help someone." Who is that someone for you? Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you so much. What a powerful reminder that a little kindness to everyone can go a long way, and we don't know what anyone is going through. Thank you, Dan. Our next speaker is Tyler Hardy. Tyler will be working from the Competent Communicator Manual doing Project 10, Inspire Your Audience. Tyler is the current Area 26 Director, and he's the VP of Public Relations for this group, Toastmasters Live. He's been a Toastmaster for a little over a year and is always looking for new ways to keep involved in the local community. He also keeps busy as a lead marketing member of Young Professionals of Minneapolis organization and as a yoga and fitness enthusiast. Today he shares with us his method for staying focused and effective in today's busy, distracted world. Please help me welcome Tyler Hardy. Thank you.
Sue. Thank you, Sue. How many of you feel like there's not enough hours in the day to get done what you want to get done? I think all of us can think that. Well, I'll let you in on a little secret. We can't change how many hours are in a day, but we can change how effective we are at taking on the day. In this modern age, we're busier than we've ever been. From the moment we wake up, our mind is off racing, thinking about what we need to get done that day or the next day or even a month away. It's easy to become so distracted that we can't even focus on what we want to get done that day. For me, I have one simple yet very effective method for becoming more focused and more present in the moment, thus able to live a more fulfilling and enriching life. This secret of mine, this practice that I want to share with you all, is the practice of yoga. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves on thinking what yoga really means, there's a few misconceptions about yoga I want to dispel right away. The first misconception is that yoga is nothing more than some glorified stretching routines. Now, yoga can benefit us physically, but it's actually rooted in mental and spiritual foundations. It was created 5,000 years ago by priests in northern India to document the path towards mental enlightenment. Now, more recently, it's taken on a physical nature, but you'll also have much more mental benefits as well from regular yoga practice. The second misconception is that you have to be a female, 20-year-old, and have a full closet full of yoga pants to don at the yoga studio. That's also an incorrect misconception, because now more than ever, everyone is starting to realize the benefit that yoga has from all different walks of life. And in fact, in the last 4 years alone, the number of American yoga practitioners has skyrocketed from only 20 million in 2012 to more than 40 million in 2016. And what's more, only 19% of regular yoga practitioners are between the ages of 19 and 28. 4 out of 10 are actually 50 years or older. Again, highlighting that no matter where you are, where you're trying to go, or where you've come from, there's a flavor of yoga that can benefit us all. Now, I want some audience participation for this next part to demonstrate how easy it is to incorporate some simple and basic but effective yoga practices. On the count of 3, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to take a big inhale. Make sure you're sitting upright and taking in a big, deep breath. For 3 seconds, I want you to inhale, thinking about all those stressors, those to-do items, those tasks that aren't serving you in the present moment. Then for the next 3 seconds, we'll have a loud, audible exhalation, letting go of all those worries, those troubles, that things that aren't serving you right here and now. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Once more. 1, 2, 3. By connecting with our breath, we're able to refocus instantly, and we're more equipped to undertake any task that's flung our way. This connection with our breath is core to any yoga practice, no matter what type you're practicing. There's so many different types. There's one that's right for you. From the most beginning, there's restorative type of yoga, which focuses on that breathing exercise that we just did. In this type of yoga, practitioners will hold stretching poses from anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes. And the biggest challenge is not falling asleep while you're practicing the yoga. Yet you'll still get the added benefit of improved mental clarity after the practice is over. Moving along the spectrum of intensity, more physical practice or a type of yoga is Vinyasa Yoga. Now, if you go to a yoga studio or a gym and see flow or yoga flow, then it's a Vinyasa practice, which again focuses on connecting with your breathing, but incorporates more physical movements, looking at increasing your strength and your flexibility and balance. Even more extreme is Bikram Yoga. This is practiced in a heated setting, so you'll feel the stress just melting out of your pores if you choose to follow this path of yoga. But regardless of the purpose you wish to accomplish, whether it be clearer mental focus, more flexibility, injury prevention, or strength and conditioning, there is a type of yoga out there that's right for you. Now, not only is there so many different types of yoga, but there's so many different benefits as well, and they're well documented. According to the Yoga Alliance, which is more or less the professional organization of yoga, if they had one, in a study they recently conducted, they found that after only 3 weeks of practicing yoga, yogis, or yoga practitioners, already saw an improved strength, flexibility, and endurance. And 75% also reported that they were able to focus better than they had before they started the practice. Now, most surprisingly is also that people who practice yoga reported that 80% of them give back to the community. So not only are they more mentally and physically fit, but they're more engaged and active in their community. For me, yoga's been nothing short but life-altering. It wasn't until 1 year ago, though, that I started to regularly practice yoga, incorporating a 5 to 10 minute breathing regimen every morning when I wake up. And it was truly life-altering for me when 1 year ago I was going through a really tough time in my life. I was at a very low point. I was going through a tough breakup with one of my former partners, and we'd been dating for 3 years. I remember one cold winter night reaching down for the phone to hurriedly dial the digits of my mom's number. Tears were streaming down my face. My mom could hear me sniffling on the other side of the line. She asked me, "Tyler, sweetie, is everything okay?" But I said, "No, Mom." I'd become so overwhelmed with anxiety, focusing on where I should be going, what I should be doing next, and who I should be with, that I couldn't even stay focused on my normal day-to-day tasks. My mom tried her best to put me at ease that night, but it wasn't until a week later when I really found my peace of mind. My friend invited me to a neighborhood yoga studio. I went that night feeling as if I was overcome by such anxiety. My mind felt as if there was a war zone with all the things going on in my life. But instantly I felt welcome and warm and invited when I got to the studio. The teacher personally greeted me and asked how she could customize the night to suit the purpose that I wished to accomplish that evening. All of the other community members there were also equally warm and welcoming. And at the beginning of class, we set an intention, which we do at every class. And this is a practice to help us pick one focus for that hour-long practice. This increases our ability to stay present in the current moment. An intention can be one that we send out feelings of joy or happiness to a loved one, to ourselves. It can be anything. But again, it's the practice of staying mentally focused for a whole hour long. After that class, I felt as if I had emerged from that war zone and stepped into a pool of serenity. Never before had I felt so calm and so at ease. Now, I make sure to incorporate at least 2 hours a week of yoga practice. But even just 5 to 10 minutes of that breathing exercise we did earlier is enough to make you more mentally aware and able to enjoy the present moment. Madam Toastmaster.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm incredibly inspired. Even giving us the tip that in 3 weeks we could be more energetic, more flexible, and have better endurance. I'm going to do awesome at putting up holiday lights this year. Our final speaker is Don Mathews. Don has been a member of Toastmasters since 1996 and is a very accomplished speaker. He has competed in over 30 speech contests and has made it to district level 5 times. That's an impressive number. Some of his speech contests, as well as an entire series of speeches devoted to Peter Pan, can be found on his website at meetdon.com. Don is a master at spinning tall tales, and he gets a lot of ideas from stories in history. His project today is to bring history alive by telling us a captivating and interesting story of history. Don's choice is to tell us about the middle finger story, which turns out to be a history of tall tales. Help me welcome Don Mathews.
There aren't many things that can upset one human being faster than seeing a skyward pointing middle finger of another human being directed at them. Why does such a silly gesture have such an effect, and how did it become so universal? The most believed story was during the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. It was a turning point battle between the English and the French in the 100 Years' War. Henry V was outnumbered by the French by a large margin. The French were expecting victory. It was also the time that the English had invented the longbow. The longbow was about 6 feet and 6 inches long, had 105 pounds of draw force, and the arrows could pierce chainmail from 200 to 250 yards away. The French feared the longbow, and therefore tried to intimidate the English by stating any English bowman that was captured would have their middle finger removed, so they could never shoot again. After the English won that battle, and won it hard, they conveniently showed off their middle finger to show that they still had it. The English went on winning more battles during the 100 Years' War, and they kept reminding the French that they still had that middle finger. It became such a wide world activity to recognize it as a way of expressing displeasure. What a great story. If only it were true. Sometimes I wish I was the one who invented that story. Now, if that story was true, Shakespeare would have brought that up in his play Henry V. But no, his highlight to the Battle of Agincourt was Henry's St. Crispin's Day speech. The reality is that people have been flipping people off for a lot longer than that, and it hasn't always been universal. The earliest known reference is the Greeks. They used middle finger as a reference to male genitalia. Now, it's not clear to me exactly how they did that or what they used it for, but I'm sure I could make something up. Now, during the Germanic Wars, the Roman historians noticed in their writings about how the Roman soldiers were greeted by German tribesmen as they advanced upon them. It happened often enough that the Romans gave it a name, Digitus Impudicus, also known as the impudent finger. Now, I also said that the gesture isn't universal. In 1968, the USS Pueblo was captured by North Korea. Crew members were held and interrogated. The North Koreans took pictures of the crew and released them to the world so that everyone would just know how well treated they were. The North Koreans noticed that many of the crew members had proudly displayed that middle finger while being photographed. When the North Koreans inquired about the gestures, the crew members explained that it was the Hawaiian good luck sign. And they bought it. That story proves 2 points. One, the middle finger gesture has not always been that universal for all those years. And two, there is a value in telling tall tales. In the United States, flipping the bird is our primary choice gesture of showing displeasure towards others. We also think that everyone else in the world understands this. In the 1980s, I was a camp counselor at a YMCA camp. There was 1 week where we were going to have 25 campers join us from Spain. The arrival day was full of excitement. Everyone in the camp had been preparing for their arrival. The camp director gave hourly updates on the progress of their arrival over the PA system. They're getting on the bus. The plane has landed. And just before the bus arrived, we were all in a formal lineup. The counselors were up front. The campers that could play instruments over there. The rest of the campers all about, and the directors stood like dignitaries at the stopping point of the bus to greet the Spanish campers for when they made their exit. Then finally, that bus rolled in, and we started waving and playing music, and we noticed that a few of these campers were showing us the Hawaiian good luck sign. The campers just fell about with laughter and returned with a similar gesture. Once the translator stopped laughing, she told us that they said, "We didn't think you knew what that meant." Now, we may never find out the accurate evolution of the history of flipping people off, but we can all agree that the stories are entertaining. Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you. I love wrapping up on a high note. I'll keep mine low, though. The next part of our meeting is when we bring up our general evaluator, Sherry Jacobson, who will call her team to Ingather and give us feedback on today's meeting. Welcome, Sherry.
Thank you so much. Okay. Hi, I'm Sherry Jacobson. I am your general evaluator for today. This is the evaluation portion where we have different evaluators that come up and give feedback to our speakers on how they can improve, what they did right, and an overall feeling about their speeches. I would like to introduce first our first speech evaluator, Don Mathews. He's going to be evaluating George Deliduka's speech. So if I could have Don up here, please. Thank you.
Evaluate George's speech. Don't Stifle Free Speech. It was an editorial from the, which manual? from the Communicating on Video manual. There we go. And I really enjoyed the speech. I managed to come in just right before you started, so I had to get in the mood for it. What I noticed right off the bat was, as you were sitting here at the table, you were prepared, you were ready, and you were looking very professional. You looked just like an editorial person doing an editorial on TV. So you got the broadcast quality right there. As far as your topic, I think that was a very good topic to talk about free speech, especially since this event with the football players taking a knee has lately taken a lot of space on Facebook. So instead of people posting stupid pictures of their cats, they're now commenting on free speech. So at least they're doing something a little more productive with their time. One thing that I really liked about the way you did the speech was that you clearly explained both sides of the issue. That you have people that protest by exercising their free speech, and then there are people that basically do not like that, and they go against that. I like the fact that you presented it very well balanced before you had brought in your opinions. The one thing that I would like to see as an improvement is that once you brought in your improvements, I would have liked to see them a little bit stronger, stating this is, what you feel, and more evidence to back up how this or why you feel that way. So that, because when you think about it, when an editorial, you're trying to convince others to join your opinion. It's not just a call to action, but to encourage people to do, to think like you think, and to be very persuasive is the skill that this is what you're aiming for. But other than that, I really think you did a very professional job. It was very well done, and you look good. Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you. For our next speech evaluation, I would like to bring up Dan to evaluate, I would like to bring up George to evaluate Dan's speech. Thank you.
Madam General Evaluator, Toastmasters, and the viewing audience. Dan has a real challenge. The challenge was to give a general purpose and a specific purpose, and develop supporting documentation that lets the specific purpose details grow to the point where the general purpose intent is fully understood. My first perception is that the general purpose was the subject of trauma, and that's a big subject, and he admitted that as such with his definition. And then he began to get into descriptive words that described symptoms, among other things. And this is where I began to say, okay, what really is your specific purpose? And one of the things that he shared with me is that the title of the speech was Your Body Keeps Score. I did not totally grasp the process of the body's score keeping. And maybe that's where he really wanted to go, but I didn't see you quite getting there. Your comments about physical and psychological manifestations didn't have enough power for me, didn't have enough strength to reinforce the consequences that are recognized by the symptoms that you were showing us. And yet, you did get to the point where you were saying, all right, we've got therapies, and therapies make a difference. And there are 3 styles. And you even, in effect, had said that EMDR is out there. It's being recommended, but it's not a cure-all yet. So we have a lot of information on the big picture of trauma, the specifics being perhaps the examples of symptoms, and a little bit on the process of coping. And then you tried to wrap it up with the types of therapies that were available. You had a strong message. You tried really hard to share with us that the idea of trauma needs to be looked at more effectively within ourselves and within our own personal lifestyle. May I suggest that when you go from a general to a specific, to try and be a little more definitive as to when you're getting into the specifics that's going to support the big picture which you opened up with. It was a powerful speech, and I learned a lot. Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you. Our next speech evaluator, Dan, will be evaluating Tyler's speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator. Tyler, overall, I thought you did a great job with this speech. A lot of times with this speech, I see a little lack of emotion in it. But I really felt that throughout your speech, you did have that element of emotion throughout, which I think is a very powerful part of what this speech needs to be, because you're trying to inspire the audience. And you inspire the audience by drawing out the emotion. I thought you did a fabulous job of that. One of the things I really liked is that near the beginning, you talked about misconceptions we had. You kind of anticipated what we would object to when you're talking about yoga, which I think was very good because I was definitely one of those people. And you bringing that up, again, it helped shatter some myths. I think that was a very good way to start it out, because you want to deal with those misconceptions right away so people will listen to further on. And one of the things I especially liked, though, was talking about the different flavors of yoga. I guess I haven't heard that enough. I've heard people talk about yoga, but in terms of talking about the specific types of yoga, I think that's been lacking. So I think you educated to me today about some different types of yoga. So I think that it was very helpful to look at it. Yoga isn't just one thing. There's lots of different elements of that. So I thought that was very helpful to do that. You gave us, in terms of the benefits of yoga, again, I think it felt like it was something that an entire audience could relate to in terms of the benefits, and something we would welcome to have. So again, I thought you did a good job of laying that out. The emotions really came through, though, when you talked about the troubled time you had about a year ago, and when you talked to your mom. Again, I think that really brought in the emotion of the speech, and it really helps for the audience to be able to engage with you when you're talking at that level. So I really liked that, and I think that was very effective. And then talking about your first time in terms of going to a yoga meeting. Again, that was effective because, again, a lot of us don't know what that would be like. And so you coming from that perspective, what it was like, how you felt. Again, it was all very powerful. If there's one thing I would recommend in terms of maybe doing next time is I felt like at the end, in terms of talking about some of the breathing, but I didn't feel like there was enough in terms of a call to action in terms of what we can actually do. I would like to know, maybe offering in terms of if you're interested in knowing more, contact me. I can refer you to somebody. Or just maybe resources for people to check out so they can get more information. So that would be the only thing I would recommend. But overall, I felt this was a very powerful speech. And again, it's usually times people struggle with in terms of getting the emotion in a speech. But I really think that you did a great job of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. For our last speech evaluator, Tyler is going to be evaluating Dawn's speech. Tyler? Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Dawn, you're so comfortable up here. You make it look easy. As soon as you got up to the lectern, you were engaging to the audience. You had a smile on your face. We wanted to hear what you were saying. And throughout, I feel like the exaggeration and the engagement and your enthusiasm just continued to climb. I really appreciated your use of detail in this particular speech, which was one of the main objectives of this speech. We got a lot of juicy details about the history of the middle finger. And you nailed it completely when you incorporated a second time the Hawaiian peace sign. Everyone in the audience was laughing, and I'm sure anyone watching the video would be doing the same. I did have a question, though. Up front, it wasn't clear to me that the history was something, of the origin was something that was debated, or that there was multiple stories. So when you first told me the story about the English bowman, I took that as the source of truth of the origin, and that you would then move on to other points. I didn't realize that the story, or your speech, was going to be more of an exploration of the various origins of the middle finger. So maybe just setting that up in the beginning as a roadmap for the audience to follow would paint a little bit clearer of a picture. But again, great job. I laughed, we all laughed, and we really enjoyed your speech. Thank you, Dawn.
Our next evaluator will be Ricky, and Ricky is our grammarian, and Ricky has been listening to our uses of the English language, and he's been counting our ums and ahs. Please let me introduce Ricky. Thank you.
Well, like always, everybody did a very good job of talking. Very few filler words went on. The only couple ahs and one was what I heard. We had one person use the word of the day, George, which is kind of hard to do, to use a word of the day when you have prepared speeches. So I don't fault anybody for doing that. I kind of wish for the speech evaluations you guys would have used it, but not a problem. There was very good uses of pauses, and that's what Toastmasters teach us to do. Instead of using the filler words, to use the pauses, and everybody did a very good job at that. So overall, we did a very good job, and very few filler words or the colloquialisms that would come with it. Thank you very much. And Chairman.
Thank you. Our next evaluator is our timer. Our speeches, evaluations, and when we have table topics, they're all timed. If Judy would please come up and give us her timer's report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster and fellow Toastmasters and the viewing audience. In Toastmasters, we time all the speeches and evaluations, and today we had various amounts of times for our presentations, starting with George Deliduka. His speech was between 2 and 3 minutes, and it was 2 minutes, 46 seconds. Don Nelson, his speech was targeted for 5 to 7 minutes, and he was 9 minutes, 14 seconds. Tyler Hardy, his goal was 10 minutes, and his speech was 10 minutes, 9 seconds. Don Mathews, goal was 5 to 7, and he made 5 minutes, 15 seconds. As far as evaluators, Don Mathews' evaluation, 2 minutes, 17 seconds. George Deliduka was 3 minutes, 33 seconds. Dan Nelson, 2 minutes, 41 seconds. Tyler, 1 minute, 33 seconds. And Ricky, 1 minute and 2 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you. Now it's my turn to give my thoughts about the meeting. We had a late start because of some technical difficulties, and our main information resource was being utilized by another group. So it took us a few minutes to get going, but once we all came together, boom, we were moving. Sue, you had a great introduction. I loved how you talked about the club, and I just thought you did a great job. We had 4 really great speeches, and they were 4 different speeches. Viewers of North Metro TV, this is a great example of what Toastmasters does. You get to choose what you want to talk about. If you want to talk about your dog, talk about your dog. If you want to talk about your wife, that's fine. And you saw an example of how we had 4 speeches. We had 4 speeches that were completely different. George, your speech was very inspiring and informational. Dan, your speech touched my heart. Tyler, congratulations on number 10. Yay! 10 speeches. Tyler is now eligible for his Competent Communicator Award, and this is a big deal. So congratulations, we're right there for you. And yes, and I want to go join a yoga class, so I think I'm going to be looking for one tomorrow. And Dawn, you taught me what the middle finger is all about. And you had me laughing, and you really ended the speeches, the series of speeches on a very good note, I thought. I like the new format of allowing us to make mistakes. We're producing a Toastmasters meeting and not a TV show, and I really like that. Even though I think I'm the biggest contributor to most of the mistakes this evening. With that, I would like to turn it back over to our Madam Toastmaster. Thank you.
What a successful meeting. This was enjoyable from beginning to end. I'd also like to recognize we have some guests in the audience, and this is an opportunity if either of you would like to come up and say anything about this experience. You are under no obligation to do that, but I'm making that offer available. Do either of you want to come up and talk at all? No, thank you. No, thank you? All right. We do welcome guests. Anyone who's watching, if you want to come sit in our audience, we'd love to have you here. So just check with us on our next available taping. We tape on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday every month. We start at 6:30 p.m. We're at the North Metro television station in Blaine. So we welcome people to come join us if you would like to do more of what we were doing here tonight. With that, I'm going to close a very successful meeting. Thank you all for everything you've done tonight.